I see that Madam Ambassador Arikana Chihombori Quao is online, and so is Professor John Patrick Ifedi, and I believe also Professor Mensah. So we have a full panel now. So we will start. There is no introduction, no need to introduce Madam Ambassador, because Madam Ambassador is referred to in Washington, D.C. as the ambassador. When we say the ambassador, we know who we are talking about. And we are extremely grateful for the work of advocacy that Madam Ambassador Chihombori Quao does for Africa. So without further ado, I will give you Madam Ambassador, the ambassador.
Thank you, my sister. Thank you, Professor. To the honorables, dignitaries on the call, the attendees, thank you for taking the time to come for these very important conversations. I have been asked to speak today on the issue of the new Scramble for Africa. It is indeed something that people are not aware is going on, but sadly, it is real and it's happening, and it's time that we all wake up, particularly of Africa. We are the inheritors of what is going on in our beloved continent. The building of the Africa we want is our responsibility and ours alone. But we have been lied to. We have been fed false information. For that reason, we believe Africa is a diseased and dying continent, a continent that we must run away from. That is very sad. The conversation today, I thought, could be a conversation that we can say, as people of African descent, how do we play defense against the new Scramble for Africa? We are all quite aware of colonization and the damage that it continues, the havoc that it continues to wreak around the continent. We are all fully aware that now we are in the neo-colonial phase. Well, while the colonizers have enjoyed Africa for centuries by themselves, they are now also joined by yet another bigger colonizer, China. Yes, China may not have deep roots as the colonizers do, but the damage at the end of the day is the takeover of Africa. That must be stopped by any means necessary. In addition to those two big, the East and the West, two blocks that are coming to exploit Africa in a big way, the rest of the world also has woken up to what is going on in our Africa. The Chinese, the Indians are there, big time. The Middle Easterners are there, the Russians, the Japanese, the Australians. Everybody is scrambling for Africa because they've all woken up to realize that all the natural resources they need for their economies to grow are in Africa. So let's make no mistake about it. There's a grand strategy that was put in place, starting with even before colonization, followed by colonization. But that strategy at the end of the day was designed to see to it that sub-Saharan Africa must never grow. I want to repeat that. The agenda for the West has always been to see to it that sub-Saharan Africa is exploited to the fullest, and that sub-Saharan Africa must not develop, because a developed sub-Saharan Africa is to the detriment of the Western nations. I thought we might take our conversation and talk about what I call the African tree of life. The African tree of life that once was the center of the world. The African tree of life that once presented civilization, presented humanity to the world. We taught the world what it means to be human. We taught the world what it means to be civilized. Somewhere along the way, the African tree of life that was once a thriving tree is now in disarray. It's a tree that is no longer thriving, and something must be done to revitalize the African tree of life. In order for us to play defense against these outsiders who are coming to invade Africa and have been invading Africa and are now launching the new Scramble of Africa because of the African Continental Free Trade Area. People of African descent, the inheritors of what is in Africa, you must understand what you're up against. You must understand what you're up against. If you don't understand what you're up against, the African Continental Free Trade Area will effectively open up our Africa so the rest of the people who've been exploiting us can more than quadruple their presence in Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area is creating an Africa that is easy to do business. But who are we simplifying this process for? I can tell you right now, it's not for us, the children of Africa. It's not even for the Africans on the continent. Why is that? Two things. The capacity that is needed to build the Africa we want. Africa just doesn't have enough of it. As we speak today, there's not a single African country that can build an airport on their own. There's not a single African country that has the capacity to build a railway line. We have to look outside. And when they look outside, who are the people who are more than ready with their finances and their expertise? They're coming from Europe. They're coming from the East. The children of Africa in the diaspora, you must wake up and realize that there's a vacant seat that has your name. A vacant seat that says, if you do not move into Africa and take those contracts, guess what? Do not complain when the Chinese show up and grab that contract, when the Europeans show up and grab that contract. So for us to be clear about why we must wake up, why we must come together to defend the new scramble for Africa, allow me to highlight 6 issues that I feel that these root causes of why the African tree of life is ailing, if we can understand them, we can begin to strategize and defend our Africa in a way that is sustainable. What we have done all these centuries is understand our Africa in a very superficial way. The issues that they make us highlight, in my opinion, they are issues above the ground on this ailing tree. The issues of bad governance, poor leadership, corruption, poor healthcare, poor education, poor infrastructure, disease, dying, and starvation. Those are all the leaves and the flowers and the branches of the tree that come and go one season after the other. This is precisely why when we change leaders in Africa, nothing changes. Because in changing the leader alone without understanding and addressing the root causes of why Africa is where it is today, nothing is going to change. We've had many elections in Africa, many leaders have been changed, but fundamentally, nothing has changed in Africa, and this is why. Issue number 1, root cause of why the African tree of life is ailing. Long before the children of Africa were taken out of Africa as slaves, the Westerners, Europeans specifically, they came to Africa and found an amazing continent with well-established civilizations and educational systems. They wondered how on earth they could conquer such a people. And they set out a strategy to destroy the African mind. They came up with an idea that made us believe that everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. They took it a step further and used religion. Took a good book, a book that is designed to teach us the righteous way of living, manipulated it and misrepresented it to the Africans. They told us about a place called heaven, and that in heaven, there are beings called angels, and they're beautiful, and everybody must aspire to be like them. And then they turn around and said, oh, by the way, the angels are white. And we too, while we may not look like this white tablecloth, we are white, like the angels. And also there's a place called hell. And in hell, there's this being, mean, ugly devil that does all the horrible things. And you don't want to go to hell. And by the way, the devil is black. And you too are black. Even though we may not look like this black tablecloth, never mind that you don't look like this black tablecloth. You're black like the devil. They began the process of criminalizing blackness. They began the process of making us self-hate. They said, let's go to church. You get on your knees and kneel and worship the white angels. They worship a white Jesus who we know in the Bible, Jesus Christ was not white. We know that to be true because when Mary and Joseph were running away from King Herod, they were told to go to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because in Egypt, he would blend with others who looked like him. The Bible even describes him as having crimson skin. So the first lie that continues to this very day, Black people were intentionally brainwashed to self-hate. We were equated to the devils. We never questioned it. We were lied to that we are Black. Remember, before the colonizers came to Africa, before the settlers came to Africa, they didn't even call themselves white. We were not Black, they were not white. But when they came to Africa, they used color to feel us inferior, to make us feel inferior, and to make themselves superior. The question then becomes, why is it centuries later we have not undone this lie? A lie that is so pivotal and it affects every Black person in everything that we do, because we automatically feel inferior and they automatically feel superior. Why is it, my brothers and sisters, that we have not said hell to the no to this number one lie? The brainwashing of the Black person is issue number one that continues to hound us to this very day. We can never be the best that we can be because we are meant to believe that we are inferior. That has got to change. And that means you and I, who must have a serious conversation with the image in the mirror and remind ourselves and our children that no one is superior to us and we're not inferior to anybody. The brainwashing of the African, the brainwashing of the Black person that started centuries ago must be undone. Problem number one. Because no matter what you do, you can go to that boardroom with a colonized mind. You can go to that boardroom with a mind suffering from the legacy of slavery, garbage in, garbage out. You're not good for the Black person. Until you can stand up and say, I'm as good as anybody else. I'm a proud African, regardless of where I was born. And I matter. And I'm just as important as anybody else. That I was created under his image, and I'm just as good as anybody else on earth. That message must resound loud and clear, and we must heal our minds. Issue number two, after they have succeeded at completely destroying us mentally, brainwashing us to the fullest, they then got together in 1884 to 1885, this time, to really put in a plan to completely destroy Africa. So it is they met in Berlin in 1884, November to February of 1885, took out their carving knives and chopped up Africa into the tiny little countries that we are today. Economies designed to make sure that they will forever be chasing their tails. Economies that can never survive on their own, no matter how hard they try. Economies that are easy to exploit. 1884 to 1885. Fast forward, 2021, and the beat goes on. How is Lesotho supposed to take her own little basket and go to the global market to trade with China that's coming with 10 warships and there's parity? The world says, yeah, you're all equal. You're all independent nations with sovereignty. Compete equally on the world stage. What kind of stupidity is that? And we have never questioned it. I often say it's like taking my own poor husband and throwing him in the same boxing ring with Muhammad Ali, with Mike Tyson. And when my husband collapses before he gets on the stage, the world says, what's wrong with you, Dr. Quao? You can't fight Mike Tyson. It's insanity of the highest order. Berlin Conference, for those of you who think Berlin Conference is a piece of history, wake up. Berlin Conference is alive and well today, and we continue to live it and suffer from those decisions that took place in Berlin in 1885. We must undo the Berlin Conference. The reason African countries were unable to trade with each other, thanks to the Berlin Conference, because we have borders. You are French and we are British and we don't know each other. Berlin Conference broke up tribes, families that were once one. The more peaceful a tribe was, the larger the tribe was, the more countries that came out of it. And the countries were given to different colonizers that spoke different languages. Give it a couple of generations, people who were once one no longer knew each other because they spoke different languages. Understand the Berlin Conference you can understand why Africa is where it is today, from a pivotal level, not a superficial level. And then they took over during colonization. If you were colonized by the British, you were ruled from London. If you were colonized by the French, you were ruled from Paris. And then slowly more and more leaders began to emerge out of the African population. They started demanding their independence. So it is, the first independence was given to Ghana in 1957 under the leadership of our own Kwame Nkrumah. But what they did was give Ghana limited political independence. I say limited because even to this day, they use their financial muscle to decide who should be the next leader of any African country. What they never gave Africans were financial liberation. Remember those multinationals who operate in those African countries during colonization? If you're colonized by the British, the majority of the multinationals, majority of the employers in your country were British companies. If you're colonized by the French, the same is true. If you're colonized by the Germans, by the Italians, by the Belgians, guess what happened during independence between 1950s into the 1960s? They just lay low. They never left Africa. So issue number 3, the colonizers have never left Africa. To this very day, they're still there. They're the majority of the employers in Africa. They're the ones who control the economies in Africa. If a president starts to misbehave, they just pack up their bags, and before you know it, 100,000 people are unemployed. Issue number 3, the colonizers have never left Africa. Berlin Conference is alive and well. Issue number 4, then they set up, met, and came up with the Bretton Woods institutions. The institutions whose own survival is based on the failures of the developing nations, majority of whom are African nations. So it was set up such that these countries will get these bogus loans with humongous interest rates just so African countries can continue to chase their tails, to their detriment, to the benefit of the Western world. To this day, that continues to this very day. You take a country like Greece, which has defaulted at so many different fronts, they get loans with a better interest rate than some African countries that have never defaulted on their loan repayment. You can count on one hand at any given time the number of African countries that may have defaulted on their loan repayment. The majority of African countries have never defaulted on their loan repayments. Why then are African countries being given such high interest rates? It's all by design. The average African country today is paying over 30% of their GDP on loan repayment. That is more than what they need to spend on education and healthcare combined. It is all by design to keep African countries where they want them to be, where African countries will always be needy and keep coming back for more money that they can never be able to repay. The world global financial institutions, their policies must be disrupted. Until those policies are disrupted, African countries are forever going to be chasing their tails. They will never get out of the financial doldrums that we found ourselves in. Unless if we re-strategize as Africans and pull out our own funding. We're a mineral-rich continent, but there's so many roadblocks put in place to keep us from accessing our own wealth. Issue number 4, the world global policies, they must be disrupted. Issue number 5, have you ever wondered why is it that 65% of the world cocoa comes from West Africa, and yet it's only 2 years ago that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire started manufacturing some chocolate. In the past, when West Africa has tried to add value to their cocoa, the tariffs that were thrown on those value-added products was so high that it wasn't even worth adding value to any of the resources. Have you ever wondered, why is it that we got a whole city called Cadbury, a whole city called Hershey, cities built on cocoa beans from West Africa? All those cities have to do is add water and milk. Most people don't even realize that. Where is Hershey City in West Africa? Where is Cadbury City in West Africa? Because the whole plan is to have Africa provide the natural resources so we can create jobs for the West. The same is true with our teas and coffees out of West Africa, all our minerals. Look at coltan alone. If we were to say every microchip that requires coltan must be manufactured in Africa, we can eliminate youth unemployment just like that. But the world trade policies will not allow it. The world trade policies have given a blind eye to African products being relabeled. Tell me the cocoa beans, the coffee farms in Switzerland that can justify the amount of coffees and chocolates that are all over the world labeled as Swiss coffee, Swiss chocolate. I want to see those fields in Switzerland that can justify the quantities of the products labeled Swiss coffee and Swiss chocolate and any other Swiss product that they are producing. The World Trade Organization is giving a blind eye to some of the worst abuses of Africa through trade. The world trade policies must be disrupted. I know we now have been given our sister to head this organization. The reality is she's going to be manhandled from every angle, that she won't be able to do much. But we must speak up, and we must also unite as Africans. We could actually come up with a policy and say we must trade with ourselves first before any product can get out of Africa. We must get our own entrepreneurs to produce what we need in Africa. We must build the homes that we live in, make the clothes that we wear. We must manufacture everything that we need within Africa because we have the abilities to do so. But be it as it may, the world trade policies must be disrupted. That is issue number 5. And issue number 6 goes back to what I started with, the brain drain out of Africa. Starting with the children of Africa taken out of Africa as slaves, followed by those who left Africa in search of greener pastures. The end result is Africa does not have the capacity Africa needs to build a sustainable Africa, which is why just about every African country is looking to the West and now to the East for the expertise that they need to build the Africa that we want. That can no longer be tolerated. And for that to be changed, the people who are responsible for that are the African diaspora. Make no mistake about it. A sustainable Africa cannot be built without the effective participation of the African diaspora. The problem is the African diaspora have been lied to, made to believe Africa is a diseased and dying continent. Do not go there. Well, let me let you know one thing. There is an established policy to make sure that unity between children of Africa in the diaspora and their brothers and sisters on the continent must be discouraged at all costs. But the game is up. The children of Africa are waking up now. We can no longer continue to be disconnected. We can no longer continue to be told our continent is a diseased and dying continent. We want to be anchored to our motherland just like they are. Particularly if you use the example of the United States. Ask for the voices of the Chinese diaspora loud and clear. The German Americans, the Italian Americans, the Irish Americans, the Mexican Americans, the Russian Americans, voices are loud and clear. The only voices that are missing in action are the voices of Black people. We've been told to run away from our Africa. We've been told to run away not only from each other, but also even from ourselves. So when it's all said and done, issue number 6, the brain drain out of Africa must be reversed if we are going to build a sustainable Africa. If we are going to successfully defend the new wave of Africa's recolonization, the new wave of the scramble for Africa. I hope, if I may summarize, once again, the root causes of the ailing African tree, the brainwashing of the Black person, intentional brainwashing, if I may say, that started centuries ago and remains alive and well today. Issue number 2, the Berlin Conference that set out to break up Africa so we can continue to chase our tails. That strategy remains in place to this day. That's why continental integration is a must and is a matter of urgency. The establishment of a single African currency, single African monetary policy, single African stock exchange, single African military, these issues must be addressed as a matter of urgency, but we know the powers that be do not want to see this integration. It is our responsibility to set out and commit to an integrated Africa, for that is the only way we can survive. The Berlin Conference must die. and only we, the victims, must destroy the Berlin Conference. And then, of course, the colonizers have never left. We must own our own manufacturing. We can no longer continue to have them control our economies. Until we control the pivotal areas, pivotal sectors of economic growth, we are still going to be enslaved to those who have enslaved us for centuries. And then the world trade policies and the world financial policies, they also must be disrupted and be re-established in a manner that is fair to the Africans. And we, the Africans in the diaspora, we must unite. If we can address those issues, it is my humble opinion that the issues above the ailing African tree will disappear. But addressing those issues above the tree on their own, we're going to be talking until the cows come home, like we say in Africa. Defending our Africa is our responsibility and ours alone. There's a vacant seat that we must occupy as Black people around the world. If we do not occupy that seat, then others will fill it for us. Let me remind you one thing. You do not find Black people driving the development agenda for the Chinese. Black people do not drive the development agenda for the Mexicans, for the Europeans, for Indians, for the Australians. The only place that Black people can drive a development agenda is in Africa. It would be a very sad day if we Black people vacate that place and allow those who have exploited us to occupy that seat that has our name. The building of the Africa where we want is our responsibility. Let's own our Africa, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Africa can be what we want it to be. And we must look within each other to find African solutions to African problems. And by all means, we must defend our Africa against the second wave of the scramble for Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Dr. John Patrick Ifedi, I mean, if there are two people that I really want to work together at some point on some project, it's both of you, Ambassador Arikana Chihombori Quao and Dr. John Patrick Ifedi, because you are of the similar minds of trying to move Africa in the right direction. And so I will let Dr. John Patrick Ifedi say a few remarks, and then we will be brief because we will have to open it up for two questions only, as the next panel is about ready to start, but it will start a little bit late. Okay. I'll just say that in advance. Yes.
All right. So good afternoon, everyone. And this is very hard to follow. I knew it. The ambassador was going to say all of this because I'm also her follower. But so let me just very quickly add, because in view of the limitation on time, I don't want to get us into that territory, into the weeds where we're going to be running late. But let me say very quickly that given what the ambassador has said, she's really laid down a very good conceptual framework for understanding what is going on the African continent today. I don't think anybody could have said it more eloquently. The things that I need to add is that if you look at that framework that she laid out, you're going to find some of the confusion and the cultural conditioning that has gone on in Africa, like the Black Eagle likes to say, that the African person has been culturally conditioned to believe that everything Black is bad, and everything that is white is good. And the social, political, and economic manifestation of this kind of cultural conditioning is that the Black person is undervalued, underestimated, and marginalized. So we find ourselves in a situation where the Europeans came to Africa and did everything that Ambassador so eloquently outlined, and yet people like Conrad calls Africa, essentially the dark continent, in the sense that Africa suffers from the heart of darkness, which is not really true. Because if you look at in terms of what Europeans have done in Africa, you're going to find out you can decide for yourself who has the heart of darkness. And then they also call Africa the white man's burden. But given what the ambassador has very clearly laid out from the inception of the European contact with Africa in the 15th century to this point, who is actually whose burden? I think that the white man is really the Black man's burden. And so we see so many forces going on in Africa today. And every country is subject to certain external stimuli, political, economic, and otherwise, that tends to condition the way people behave. But at this particular time, knowing what you've known for a very long time with slavery and the subsequent colonization with foot on the ground by Europeans, and the subsequent transformation of that particular colonialism to neocolonialism based on global institutions, theorists like the world systems theory, dependency theory, and the political economic theory explains in terms of the fact that Africa has been given a particular condition in the global world economy. And that's where it sits today as the hewers of wood and fetchers of water. It cannot really develop. If Africa develops, then the rest of the Europe will suffer. It's almost like a zero-sum game. And I don't want to add any more to it because the ambassador was very eloquent in spelling all of this out very, very clearly. And then, beyond that, of course, Africa is a treasure trove of all kinds of minerals. We can't even begin to count them, strategic and otherwise, and even agricultural products and so on and so forth. And what is happening there is Africa is the Europeans. You can call it a conspiracy, but the idea is that every European country believes that Africa should never develop, and that the only thing that Africa should do is to yield its raw materials to the rest of the world to be processed somewhere else. And because of that, there is no manufacturing base in Africa at all. The European colonialism makes sure that Africa is simply a plantation that happens to have human beings on it. And those human beings are supposed to be able to produce the goods that the resources of Africa. And so Europeans prepared Africa very, very well for what is going on now with China. And China steps in and finds Africa totally bereft of any kind of infrastructure, any kind of manufacturing base, and also even the education has not prepared Africans to gain the wherewithal technologically to be able to process its own raw materials, like the ambassador very clearly explained. And because of that, it's easy for China to come in with money and then debt trap Africa again into a new colonialism, that if we're not very careful, then for the next 200 or 300 years, and Africa and China, with the kind of population that it has, an outward bound population, half rich, half poor, can actually take over Africa. And now you see the beginnings of that with military bases in places like Djibouti and presence everywhere, Confucian Institute, trying to transform Africa because one thing that China does not have going for it in Africa is that it hasn't prepared Africa culturally. Culturally, most Africans are conversant with European culture. This is why we have Confucian Institute all over Africa. We have people trying to teach Africans how to speak Chinese. And if this happens, we go from English to Chinese, and then China will own Africa into the foreseeable future as it continues to grow as a major challenge to the United States. And eventually, there's no doubt, empires rise and empires fall, countries rise and countries fall. There's no question that with the kind of technological wherewithal that China has today, that eventually is going to trump the United States as the #1 country with a global expansion that has not been seen in the history of mankind, with boots on the ground again in Africa. And we're beginning to see the beginnings of that across the continent. So the idea is that, yes, it may not seem so, but Africa is surely and gradually being recolonized. You might not call it that, but I believe that the person that you owe owns you. And the Chinese strategy is debt trap and technological transfer, not technological transfer, but also dependency, creation of dependency, and also debt trap. Eventually, you owe Chinese, and therefore they own you. Everybody knows that the person that you owe owns you. You're going to be working for them. The person that you work for owns you because they can dictate your movement, they can dictate your priorities, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to go much further, but again, I'd like to say that the ambassador did wonderful work, a great presentation, and hopefully, I don't know, I'd like to get into a greater conversation with her to try to understand how we can put all this, out there in the form of maybe a book based on really the burden that the Black person actually bears in this world, for both economic, political, and otherwise. And if the diaspora and the African governments do not come together to find a way to unburden themselves with the kind of debt that they're carrying, and find a way to begin to bring diaspora intelligence into Africa to begin to do the kind of work that China is doing, then Africa may be just toast for the next 200 to 300 years or more. And I'd like to stop there and see if we can take a few questions.
Yes, I think that we have a couple of questions. There's one question that is from Dr. Jean Purchase Tulloch, who is writing about the as a Pan-Africanist, as she's talking about, I'm just summarizing her question, that there is a scramble also for other places where people of African descent are in the majority. For example, the Caribbean. There's a scramble for Africa there, for the Caribbean there, and how could the Caribbean and Africa work together? And there's another question that came from a student. Do we still see the effects of colonization in Africa today? And what can we do as young Black individuals to help? This question comes from Riley Jones.
Of course, my view is that, of course, the effect of colonization is everywhere. Not just from the language to the curriculum in schools, to the way the average African thinks. The cultural conditioning is deep, and we haven't even begun to try to undo it. It goes without saying, it's everywhere. And it is no accident that everywhere, in every country that is European, is developed. And in every country, no matter how poor, where there's a substantial European community, it is quite developed. Just the first world in a third world country like South Africa. And also the converse is also the same in very developed European countries, or where Europeans predominate, where you have the Black community in those countries are also poor. For instance, in the United States, it's no accident. There's definitely a plan to make sure that things stay the way they are, because if Africa's development will be essentially, it is understood in Europe and elsewhere, that it will be detrimental to the development of Europe. They will have to give up something. When Ghana begins to process its own cocoa and ship it to Switzerland and elsewhere, imagine what that would do for the economy of Ghana, and what that will also do conversely for the economy of those European countries. So the Europeans essentially have their knee on the neck of Africans, and they will not let Africans breathe unless we do something significant. There's going to be a new Pan-Africanism based on how to come together as African peoples from all over the world, and do not buy into the lies that Europeans have been telling for centuries. Like the ambassador said earlier, that needs to be done. But Africa's colonialism is still very much there. The transnational corporations still dictate priorities of African governments. If you want to take a look at Nigeria, you're going to find that, for instance, when the Exxon Valdez oil spill took place or happened in the Gulf of Mexico, Obama demanded $20 billion on the table before he starts talking to anyone, and was paying people who lost wages because of that. But Exxon Valdez spill in the Gulf of Mexico happens every other day in Nigeria, and nobody can say anything. And some of the activists were actually killed, people like Kensara Wiwa, for speaking out for the Ogoni people, because these governments have been captured, by transnational corporations, Western transnational corporations who get all the oil and all the products out of the ground. And because of the corrupt enterprise that is so prevalent in Africa, it is easy to corrupt our leaders. And so this colonialism continues. It hasn't really changed. It simply changed forms, but it continues unabated.
Okay, we are running a little bit late. We thank you for the answer. We are running a little bit late for the next panel. I think that the next panel is already in place. So we are going to, if there is any other observation from Madam Ambassador or from Professor Ifedi, we are going to take these observations and move to the next panel. Please go ahead.
Well, all I can say is thank you, Professor. I think your comments are really on point. And I think the level of depth of understanding and appreciation for Africa that you're speaking about, we need more people to have that appreciation. It's really through that understanding that those in leadership, regardless of what role, the ministers, the permanent secretaries, anybody in leadership, they must understand what is really going on, so they won't be used as the instruments of our own self-destruction. I use an example of the Africans, continental Africans who work at the World Bank, for example. They're the ones now at the face of the World Bank. They're the ones being sent to Africa to continue to advocate for these policies that are detrimental to the Africans. They're the ones who are being sent to advise the central banks to devalue their currencies, when we all know very well that the gold that is guaranteeing foreign currencies is in Africa. Our currency should never be devalued because we have the gold to back up our currencies. So they are now using us to be the faces of some of these evil deeds. And how do we get those who are being used as instruments of our own self-destruction to understand that they need to stop? When you're in that boardroom, you must push back, you must fight back. You must say, this is wrong. This could not be done in the United States. This could not be tolerated in Europe. So why would you want to push it to the Africans? Those conversations, they take place every day in boardrooms. And people who are in a position to speak up are too scared to speak up. So they allow those atrocities to continue. But what is going on is blatantly wrong. The world knows it. All we gotta do as Black people is stand up and push back. We can no longer continue to have the bully tactics be played on us, and we still continue to roll over until the bully returns. That has got to come to an end. It is a responsibility to each and every one of us as Black people to stand up, push back, and speak our truth. Ours is an easy fight. We're simply coming from a position of righteousness. We are the victims. And yet, as the victims, we are continuously being victimized and made to apologize for being a victim. We're almost like suffering from a battered wife syndrome, where the battered wife no longer realizes that she is battered. We have normalized things that are grossly abnormal and won't even speak to it anymore. But for us to pull back, we need to undo the damage that has been done so we can begin to see the obvious wrongs, the obvious crimes being committed as being crimes. If I may give you an example of why should we as Africans have to beg to have the remains of our ancestors brought back from Europe? It is the most ridiculous thing that you can even think of. This was murder. We should be charging them with murder, but instead we have to beg to get the remains of our ancestors to come back to Africa. We have to beg for the artifacts that they stole from Africa, to this day, openly displayed in European museums. They have no shame. They will say, oh yes, we know they came from Africa, but we're not giving them back, with a straight face. Where else could that happen? Nowhere except Africa. And they feel emboldened to do that. And we Africans, they sit back and we just let it go. That has got to come to an end. African artifacts must come back as a matter of agency. Our remains for ancestors must come back. Something so basic. I'm using those two as a basic example of how we have normalized the horribly abnormal situations, crimes perpetrated by the colonizers that we have just accepted as the normal. That will not happen. A British soldier's body will not last one day in Zimbabwe. A French soldier's body will not last 30 minutes in Cameroon. That's a fact. But what they cannot tolerate, they expect Africans to tolerate. And we Africans are letting them getting away with it. That has to stop. And for us to be able to stop it, our minds have got to change. And we must stand up and just demand what is right. We must demand a world that is fair, that is just and equitable. They're not going to hand that to us on a silver platter. We have to demand it. And that's all there is to it. And we must take ownership of it.
Very good.
The last question, which is, why do you say that is asked from a student? And we will have a very brief answer to that because the next panel is already here. And that question is, why do you think colonization chose to devalue the currency of Africans used before colonization?
They intentionally devalue the currencies for the Africans. It's all part of the global financial system. Because remember, their success is based on our failure. That's why I'm saying some of the things are so blatantly wrong that all we have to do is just say, this is wrong. It's got to stop. It cannot go on. What we are failing to do is just speak up. So it's at the end of the day, it is us. The bully has been taking our lunch. Before they used to ask for it, but now we are so used to them just taking our lunch, we just hand it over. We just need to stop handing over our lunch. And so at the end of the day, is the mind. Is the mind prepared to push back and fight back? And for the mind to be prepared to push back and fight back, it starts with knowledge and understanding. So as you are pushing back and fighting, you know what you're fighting for. And you can properly arm yourself with the right tools to fight. This is an economic war. It's not a war that calls for guns and ammunition now. It's an economic war, and we need to use words to win this war.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, on this very impassioned plea for Africa. We thank you very much. So let's give you a big round of applause for your remarks. And thank you so much for being part of the Women Ambassadors Conference, of the 25th Annual Women Ambassadors Conference. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. So we are going to, we are thanking the ambassador very profusely, and I'm sure that you will see quite a few people that will join also the ADI movement, because it's a real movement that you have created, and that movement goes beyond borders. And the website of your movement is addi.org, right? ADDI.
It's our, no, it's ouraddi.org. ouraddi, ouraddi.org. Join the movement so we can continue the conversations.
Thank you so much. And you have in the chat the applauses of all those who have joined us from different continents. Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
I also wanted to say, for the continued education, I've written a book called Africa 101. Go to africa101.org and get your copy. We talk about everything that's being done, what has been done to us, what continues to be done to us, and what we need to do to get ourselves out of this conundrum that we find ourselves in. Africa101.org. Get yourself a copy and begin the journey to self-healing and self-discovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.